Was Senzo Mchunu a corrupt minister protecting criminal syndicates, or a genuine reformer trying to improve the police? Today, Parliament heard him state his case. Should we believe it? Let's find out. Fam, I just want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's episode, Pace Car Rental. Use promo code SMWX and make sure you show Pace some love as they're showing this channel some love. Now, let's get into the episode. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX. I'm Mpofu-Walsh. So much happening in our country. I want to bring you right back up to speed with where we are in this Mkhwanazi saga. Let's start off at the Madlanga Commission, which sat publicly today to decide whether it would meet, and if it would meet, whether it would hear evidence in secret or in public. It turns out the commission has decided to go secret, so all the evidence that was led today remained behind closed doors. Take a look at when this announcement was made and what was said by evidence leader, Advocate Matthew Chaskelson.
Yes, Mr. Chaskelson and Mr. Duplessis.
Chair, I would like to report that News 24 and Daily Maverick have accepted that there is a need for today's hearings to be in camera and are no longer opposing the in-camera ruling that we seek. Just to motivate that further, as I've explained, or as the evidence leaders explained in the application and in the submissions made earlier this week, the witness testifying today is going to testify about matters that are the subject of active ongoing police investigations. So it's the subject matter of the evidence, not the identity of the witness, that requires the evidence to be in camera. And when the police are at an advanced stage of investigations, one can't ventilate the content of those investigations publicly without running a risk of compromising those investigations. And that's the unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in at the moment, because this commission is of necessity.
Of necessity, looking at these investigations. So, interestingly, the question is whether this evidence that was led in secret will ever be made public. And what the evidence leaders did undertake was that when these investigations are concluded, which Chaskelson said he's very confident will happen before the end of this commission, then that evidence that was led today will be publicly available. Of course, that means that the evidence leaders will have to stick to their word to the public that they are very confident that we will eventually get this evidence. Interestingly, though, when Madlanga reacted to this, he ultimately agreed to make sure that the hearings were secret. But he said the evidence that's being led today implicates persons who have never been mentioned before in this saga. So I was like, who are these people? I mean, so many people have already been mentioned. Who are these new people who've never been mentioned before? Clearly, we are just beginning to unravel how deep this story and this rot goes. So hopefully, sooner rather than later, we will learn who these new names actually are. I must say, I think the Madlanga Commission really needs to put together a consistent run of public hearings. It's been stop-start, it's been go, then halt, and it's a real problem for the public that's trying to follow along, that the commission needs to sit and then it goes on a 2-week break, then it comes back, and is it public, is it private? And we just need a consistent run of consistent days of public testimony. So I'm hoping after this blip, the public can get back to being able to follow along the Madlanga Commission, because it's such a crucial ground of evidence for the public. So that was the commission. Of course, today, meanwhile, Minister Senzo Mchunu, who is on special leave, was testifying before Parliament. And of course, this testimony is all important because we've heard the one side of the story, the Mkhwanazi allegations, criminal syndicates influencing ministers such as Mchunu to protect these syndicates and even advance their interests. Masemola largely supporting Mkhwanazi on those statements. Crime intelligence boss Dumisani Khumalo further adding weight to those allegations. Now we're hearing the other side of the story. First, we heard from Shadrack Sibia, the Deputy National Commissioner for Crime Detection, who's currently suspended. And today, we heard from Senzo Mchunu, again, on the other side of the equation. These are the people against whom allegations are being made, who are actually trying to rebut or challenge those allegations. Now, I would argue that an interesting dynamic is emerging here. There is a key question, which is, was it appropriate for the Political Killings Task Team, this team that Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi was running, was it appropriate for it to be disbanded? Everything, all the complexity, all the stories revolves around that decision, to disband or not to disband. There's the build-up to the disbandment, there's the disbandment, and there's everything that happens after the disbandment. There's PD, pre-disbandment, and there's post-D, post-disbandment South Africa. Now, there are a number of questions which flow from this disbandment that Senzo Mchunu signed in a letter. Was it legally appropriate? Was it constitutional? Did the minister have the power to even disband this team? Assuming it was constitutional, was it wise from a policy perspective to do so, if it indeed did fall within the minister's ambit of power? And what Minister Mchunu is seeking to advance today is that, number one, it was constitutional for him to issue this instruction, and number two, it was wise policy to disband the task team. But there's a residual question, because even if Minister Mchunu is correct, that it was constitutional, and by the way, this is controversial, it may not be correct, that it's constitutional and it was good policy in theory, there's still the question of how it was implemented in practice, and whether, in fact, the reasons for this apparently coherent decision were actually to serve and further the interests of a criminal syndicate. So I just want us to separate out those two questions. Was it theoretically within the minister's power, which it may or may not have been, and even if it was, practically, was it implemented in such a way that we can trust that the purported reasons that Mchunu is advancing have nothing to do with this criminal syndicate that has been exposed and this evidence which is bursting out from the Madlanga Commission of WhatsApp conversations with people controlling the government? So let's see what Mchunu is saying in theory. What he says is that, yes, as the minister, he goes to the constitutional text, which basically gives the power to, among other things, ultimately manage the South African Police Service, and he derives from that he did have the power to actually disband this task team. Furthermore, and quite an interesting legal, constitutional, theoretical point is, if the executive had the power to establish the team through the president, then why wouldn't the executive have the power to disestablish the team? Why would the executive establish the team, but then the police only have the power to disestablish it? Now, if Mchunu does go down that road, which he seems to be going down with his evidence, that does raise the problem of, why did the president create the team, but the minister disband it? Surely the person who created it would have a reason to know that it was also being uncreated, right? And so this is why it becomes apparent that the president, we need to hear from him, because he's the person who created the ministerial committee which really gave life to this task team. And then the minister, it seems, disbanded it, maybe with a bit of consultation, according to the minister in parliament, but it doesn't seem as if the president kind of took part equally in that decision. So here's the problem for Mchunu. If he believes the executive has power, then why wasn't the president involved? But if the executive doesn't have power, then it was an unconstitutional decision. And that is some of the tension that we will probably get in the questioning of Mchunu. Now, Mchunu also says that, quite apart from the constitutional power to disband the team, there were serious problems with the task team. The one was, it was really extracting disproportionate resources in a very resource-constrained environment. You'll remember the budget process in South Africa earlier this year, and he couldn't justify to the rest of South Africa, to the Cape Flats, to residents of Joburg and Alexandra, where crime is rife on a daily basis, why so many resources would go to a KZN task team, which furthermore was looking at high-profile politicians or people who hold public office. And effectively, he was saying that, or he is saying that, we almost had this two-tiered structure of justice. For everyone else, there's broken police stations that can barely, put sellotape on their infrastructure. And then on the other hand, you have this political killings task team, which has great resources, but it's directed to politicians. And he said he couldn't really stomach that, and he wanted to take the resources and distribute them more equitably. What he said in his statement was, we need to stop slicing and dicing our approach to crime. Instead of having specific task teams for specific things, rather have the wider South African Police Service able to more capably deal with all crime. Furthermore, and remember, I'm just trying to tell you what Mchunu is saying. I'm going to come on to whether I think it's coherent or not. Furthermore, and potentially more seriously, the political killings task team, according to Mchunu, was acting outside the law in certain cases. Particularly as they extended their investigations to Fort Hare, there were these allegations that forensic investigators, one of whom a certain Sarah Berger, was improperly detained, basically abused, and she described her experience at the hands of the political killings task team as the actions of a rogue unit. We've heard these allegations from Shadrach Sibia as well, that they tried to get a ballistics expert's laptop and played fast and loose and were quite rough in the way that they got that evidence. So there is this allegation that the task team itself was being economical with the law in the way they were carrying out these investigations. And Mchunu says he was receiving these complaints about how the task team itself was going rogue. So he said, on the one hand, there's the resource question. On the other hand, there's the fact that this task team is stepping outside the law. We need to disband it. So that's his argument. And it's an interesting argument, but at the very least, there are serious questions which need to be asked about all this. Where was all this reasoning before the 31st of December? Why didn't Minister Mchunu come before the public and tell us all this stuff? Because I must say, today we saw an animated minister who had a view on things. I mean, why didn't we know all of this before? I think the public would have gone along with this narrative if from the minute he got into office, he was saying, hey, we need to think about resources. We've got these task teams, etc. Now, Mchunu may say we were having these conversations internally, but under questioning, it did become clear that the political killings task team was never a full subject of debate to this level of depth. So is this all just what the lawyers call an ex post facto justification? A justification which comes after the fact. It's very easy in hindsight to say, oh, I did it for all these noble reasons. But one would expect these noble reasons to have been publicly acknowledged beforehand, rather than afterwards finding a reason for the imminent disbandment of this task team. Because what Mkhwanazi and Khumalo and Masemola will say is, no, the reason this task team was disbanded so precipitously was because you had an interest in making sure that it didn't pursue its investigation, because its investigation might have ended up placing you in its clutches. So there's that, but there's more, because there are a number of questions that the minister needs to answer in terms of the Mkhwanazi theory that he was really trying to protect his own skin in disbanding this task team, right? So the one question I asked is, why didn't we hear all of this in public before? The other question one could ask is, why was there such a rush to disband the task team? Okay, let's assume that it needed to be disbanded. Why did it need to be disbanded on New Year's Eve, fam? Like, honestly, who's disbanding stuff on New Year's Eve? If you even have the cognitive capacity to be disbanding stuff on New Year's Eve, then shout out to you. Maybe you should be the National Police Commissioner. So why was it this fast thing? And even when Masemola said, okay, maybe there's reasons to do this, but let's wind it down slower. And it was like, no, it has to happen now. That is another question. So you may have the power. There may even have been decent reasons, but why did it have to be done in this rushed way? That lends weight to the idea that something else was being potentially obscured or hidden or covered up. But of course, outside of all of that, the minister has very serious, direct questions to answer about messages that link him to this syndicate theory. So up until the point of shooting right now, we've heard his case for why he believes it was both constitutional and wise policy to shut down this task team. But these are some things that add weight to the other theory. Mr. Brown Mokhotsi, of course, this intermediary between politicians and criminal syndicates, purportedly. In Parliament on the 5th of March, Senzo Mchunu is put on the spot by Madlanga Commission, who says, I keep hearing that there's this Brown Mokhotsi person who's not employed by the minister, but he seems to have influence over the minister. And before Parliament, Minister Senzo Mchunu says the following, and I'm going to quote it verbatim because we really have to be quite careful about all this and look at it quite closely. He says, my comments were as follows. 2 weeks ago, remember this is in Parliament back in March, it does happen in a week or 2 or 3. I think a week and a half ago. Remember, he'd just been asked about or just been told about this Brown Mokhotsi thing. I got someone insisting that there is somebody who is going around saying that he works with me wherever I am. He is there, and I said, show me the face. And it got to a point where he showed me the face, and I told him that I don't know this person. And a week before, there was another person, and Mchunu, who said he was my younger brother. My younger brother died in 2005, and I don't have any other. And so when a person says to you, really, I think we must be very circumspect when people come to us and say, I am an associate of this and that. I am no associate to the person that General Mkhwanazi is referring to. That's what he said in Parliament. And there he seemed to drastically distance himself from Brown Mokhotsi. And of course, later, the minister did appear to contradict that, where he said, well, I do know Brown Mokhotsi, but he's not an associate, he's a comrade. Reminds me of the Morgan Maumela stuff. I didn't know him. Oh, actually, I walked past his house. Oh, actually, I met him twice. And goodness knows what else. So that story needs to be probed, and we need to get a sense of why the minister decided that he wasn't going to take the nation into his confidence in Parliament that day. Now, Mchunu has moved to defend himself there, and I want to take you to the defense because it's actually contained in his statement on page 544. Let's hope MPs read all the way there, right? But actually, his statement is actually just a copy of what he has already submitted to Parliament's Ethics Committee. So what does he say? He says, a DA MP, the Honourable Schikkerling, put this complaint that he basically misled Parliament about Brown Mokhotsi. He says, in the recording of the Portfolio Committee, which I've just rendered for you, which was on the 5th of March, Madlanga Commission speaks, and then he says he gives his response, as we've just rendered. Now, he says further, I want to elaborate on my comments, which are in essence, firstly, I refer to an incident where I made mention of a person who had been claiming to be working with me wherever I am. Upon being shown a photograph, I do state I do not know the person. But what he goes on to say is that that person is not Brown Mokhotsi. He says that he was just talking about another person, which is a bit strange because he was being asked about Brown Mokhotsi specifically. And then he said there's a person who claims, and then I saw the picture. And then, so he's saying, no, I wasn't talking about Brown Mokhotsi. I was just talking about some person whose picture someone showed me. So that's his version, which seems not fully in context with what was happening in the committee at the time. Secondly, I responded to claims of someone being my younger brother. We've heard about that. Thirdly, I warn members of parliament to be circumspect of people claiming to be one's associate. Again, that was Brown Mokhotsi. Mkhwanazi was saying Brown Mokhotsi is an associate of yours. So you can't just say that you were talking broadly about people claiming to be associates, because it was in the context of the Brown Mokhotsi allegation. And then he says, lastly, I refer to Mr. Mokhotsi. I state that I am no associate to this person, who he says is person 3. So he says there was one person who showed a picture, there was a second person about his brother, and there was a third person, Mokhotsi, and he said he has no knowledge. I'm not so sure that's a convincing response, to be honest. He then says, subsequent to the portfolio committee, he was made of an audio recording where he seems to contradict himself. He says that he didn't know he was being recorded, by the way. And he says, someone asked him whether he knew Brown Mokhotsi, and he responded, he was just a comrade from Northwest and not my close associate. I responded, ngesizulu, that angibhemi naye ugwayi. I don't smoke with him, basically. So when he was called and asked if he knew him after Parliament, he said, yeah, he's an associate, but I don't know him that well, which is kind of different to he's not an associate of mine and we should be circumspect about people who say they are associates. And he goes on further to say the difference between a comrade and an associate is that an associate is someone who works closely with you, and a comrade is just someone who shares a political party with you. So after this hearing, we need to know what the story is with this Brown Mokhotsi thing. Furthermore, we need to know about other pieces of evidence related to Brown Mokhotsi. How did Brown Mokhotsi have such close operational knowledge of SAPS? Did he get it from the minister? Did he get it from Shadrach Sibiya? Did he get it from someone else? How did he know all this stuff as an ordinary civilian? How did he know the real-time proximity of Minister Mchunu when he was visiting Lusikisiki after a terrible massacre there where 18 people in the same family were gunned down, and the minister then went to go and visit the family? How did Brown Mokhotsi know where he was? Now, Mchunu says in his statement and before Parliament, it was a public trip. You could find out where I was. How did Mokhotsi claim to be either arranging or know about high-level meetings between the minister, Sibiya, etc.? So there are just so many things that Brown Mokhotsi seems to know that could be explained by his proximity to the minister, who we already know says he knows him, he just doesn't know him closely. So these are the questions that need to be answered. These are the key questions that we need Minister Mchunu to give a cogent explanation for. How come Brown Mokhotsi knew all this stuff? Maybe the minister will say, I don't know how he knows all this stuff. You'll have to ask him. But then he might come and say, well, I know this stuff because I was talking to the minister. And we know that the phone records of Kat Matlala have someone purporting on the name to be a minister. We don't know if it actually is the minister, but we also have that information. So all of this phone record evidence and the Brown Mokhotsi evidence that has already come out seems to contradict this nice picture of a pure policy decision to reallocate resources in the SAPS. For example, Mokgotsi advised Kat Matlala on the 31st of December, New Year's Eve, it's D-Day. And then guess what? The minister wrote the directive. How did he know that? On the 1st of January, Mokgotsi told Matlala, the task team that came to your house and harassed you has been dissolved. As we speak, they're bringing the dockets to Sibiya. How did Brown Mokgotsi know the day after this thing was disbanded that the dockets were going to go to Sibiya? And how is he telling this to Kat Matlala? We need to know what the minister makes of all of this. We need to know how Mokgotsi informed Matlala that he had arranged a high-level meeting for Sibiya and the minister. Why was he going around saying he had arranged a meeting with Sibiya and the minister? Did that meeting actually happen, according to Mchunu? So there's still a lot that needs to be explained. So let me take a step back. I think Mchunu has actually made quite a compelling case that in theory, there were at least reasons why the political killings task team in theory needed to be or may have been disbanded. But the deeper question is, in practice, was Mchunu acting out of these newfound reasons that we only hear about now, or were they related to this Brown Mokgotsi, Kat Matlala, Big Five conspiracy? And I guess that's exactly why we have these commissions, so that ultimately, by the time we get to the end of the evidence, we can, as a public, make a call about which way to go. But at present, I do believe that there are still serious questions that need to be answered before accepting anything close to Minister Mchunu's version right now. But he's got many days. He's going to be back before Parliament tomorrow, and then MPs are going to get a chance to cross-question him, and the public will be able to make up their minds from there. Like, share, subscribe, keep it locked on SMWX. Look out tomorrow. We've got a great analysis video coming from Oratile and Nkadimeng about the recent parliamentary committee meeting, ad hoc committee meeting, where they tried unsuccessfully to create a witness list again, and all that happened at that meeting. Keep it locked on SMWX. We've got you covered for the commission, for the ad hoc committee, and for all that's happening in South African politics. Cop an SMWX hoodie, smwx.store. Take us to the next milestone. Let's get to 350,000 subscribers soon. We're nearly at 340, which is crazy. I think we've added 30,000 in the last 28 days or so. So shout out for that. If you're listening on podcasts, give us a good rating on podcast platforms. Share this with your friend. Share this with your family. Spread the fire. Spread the fire means spread SMWX by word of mouth, and keep building this community. We'll see you on the next one, fam. Hope you have a great night. Aye.